Hello and welcome to Policy Watch. I'm Rajat Kain and today we'll take a look at two policy initiatives by the government in the sphere of environment and labour reform. First up, we'll take a detailed look at the draft National Forest Policy 2018, which aims at sustainable forest management by incorporating elements of ecosystem security, climate change, forest hydrology, participatory forest management, urban forestry, robust framework to monitor development of the forest cover and strengthening an overall environmental balance. As per the draft, there are increased concerns for biodiversity conservation and the need to enhance forest ecosystem services through new technological advances, and continuously declining investment in the sector at present poses new challenges for forest management in the country. The draft also argues for the need to revise National Forest Policy 1988 to oversee multi-stakeholder convergence in forest management while building on a rich cultural heritage of coexistence and relying on a rich and diverse forest resources. Among the prime salient features, the draft aims at having a minimum of at least one-third of total land area under forest and tree cover and two-thirds area in the hills and mountainous regions in order to prevent soil erosion and land degradation and also to ensure stability of the fragile ecosystem. To discuss the policy threadbare, I am joined by Mr. Balendu Shekhar, Advocate of the Environmental Affairs, and Mr. Chetan Chauhan, Deputy National Affairs Editor, Hindustan Times. Welcome to the show, both the gentlemen. First up, how do you see this policy strengthening the fragile ecosystem, as we say?
First and foremost, we must see that earlier there was a policy of 1988 in which it was stressed that the environment must be protected, and for that matter all the necessary measures must be taken. This very policy, draft National Policy 2018, more or less just giving more strength to the earlier policy, because this policy is more pragmatic, more realistic and more scientific in every way. So I think it is just a progression of the policy which were earlier existing.
Mr. Chauhan, could this policy have been better in terms of striking a balance, what it says in the draft?
No, I think the draft tries to strike a balance, and it speaks about a lot of innovative new measures that the government plans to take. But the problem is, if you have to increase the forest cover or the green cover, or you want to increase the tree cover. So tree cover, if you have to increase, you can use open spaces, but the forest cover you can't increase because nobody will be giving you extra land. Already a forest cover is declining. Even if it's not declining, the quality of forest is deteriorating. If you see the latest Forest Survey of India report, the quality of dense forest, the most dense forest, has dramatically gone down. They are now moderate dense forest or maybe open forest. So maintaining the quality of forest, which this policy also speaks about, is a key to this policy. But there is a danger also in this policy because it speaks about private intervention. Many people interpret that it means it wants to give part of forest for conservation or maybe replacing it in plantations. This is not new because many of the forest departments in India, like Odisha and many other states, they have given the forest to, in the name of a joint forest management, and to some local bodies where the natural tree cover, the forest covers have been replaced by plantations. Plantations can play an havoc in the green ecosystem. Because a natural ecosystem not only provides soil conservation, enrichment of soil, water conservation, it also ensures that the entire ecosystem balance is maintained. The animal, the insect, the flora fauna is maintained. The plantation just cannot do it. The plantation may be there for some time. You will cut the trees, the new one will come, and the entire forest ecosystem is lost. You may have a tree. When you do a satellite map, a zoning, the tree cover may look nice, but you don't have a forest. So there is a danger that if you want to replace the forest with plantations, it will have a huge implications. I want to give an example of Amarkantak, from where Narmada starts. It used to have a good tree cover, forest cover, about 2 decades ago. The government with the local bodies decided, okay, that now we should replace it with plantations. eucalyptus tree came up all along the river in place of the natural tree cover. Today, now the government is saying that we have to cut the eucalyptus trees because they take so much of water, because of which around the river, from the main source, there is a drought-like condition. The river is not getting enough water. So they want to replace it with a natural forest. So this is an implication that you can have if you replace the forest with plantations. And my second question is that why would somebody private or a company, any investor will come to the forest if he doesn't have a profit? It maybe in CSR they may take 100 acres, 200 acres, 500 acres, but large scale if they want to take, the profit is the motive. Then you will have to strike a balance between profit and conservation, which is the key, which is I think one of the most dangerous aspects of this policy. Apart from that, the policy speaks about coexistence, which I welcome a lot, because I believe that you cannot conserve forest until and unless the people who are living in forest, people who are living around the forest, their rights are given and they are made partners in conservation. As of now, the Indian Forest Act of 1927 treats every person who lives in and around forest as the enemy. I think the first thing this policy should ensure is amendment of the 1927 Act, which was brought by British, to harvest timber should be replaced, changed, and the people should be allowed to harvest the minor forest produce, which can sustain their livelihood and they conserve forest. If people get some sort of a livelihood from forest, they will definitely going to conserve forest. In places where the state governments have ensured that the people who are living in and around forest earn something from the forests are conserved. And in places where they are treated as enemies, those places, the forests are being cut.
Balendu, Shekhar, as Mr. Chauhan pointed out that the previous policy treated the dwellers of the forest as the enemies. Is there a departure in these policies? And also, the questions about the improvement of the quality of forest, are those adequately addressed in the draft policy?
See, first and foremost, we must see that if people give their support for this mission, certainly this very policy would also fetch a very good result. Because unless people will not give their effective participation, no government can achieve the desired goal. And about the second aspect, which Chauhan Sahab just said, that if policy will come, then there would be likelihood that private people may start misusing all these things. For that matter, I have to say only one thing, that earlier cases or kind of stringent measures were not that much effective. But now, because of the active intervention of the various high courts as well as Supreme Court and more so of NGT, nowadays no government authority, no private entity can take all these forest thing as in a very casual way, because they every time whenever they take any such measures, they always remain responsible toward all those cases or toward the court. So I think with this policy, which is in every way in a very broad, very effective and very minute in every way, because this policy also talks about the census, about the ground teething and about the number of trees, type of tree, and how we can enhance and how we can improvise the quality of timbers, so that every way and in every possible manner about the forest thing can be improvised and can be more effective and instrumental for conserving the environment.
You think there are enough legal safeguards in the draft?
So, certainly, see, this, as I said earlier, that it is just this policy has further strengthened the earlier policy which were existing in 1988. Subsequently, various international commitment, various international agreement, as well as various other laws whatsoever evolved with the passage of time, this very policy have tried to amalgamate all those norms, all those commitment and all those things in this very present policy. So I think if everyone is really serious and if all the measures which have been enumerated in this policy are brought on the ground, then certainly result will certainly be a very good one.
Mr. Chauhan, as it said that its policy seems to be improved, as argued by Mr. Balendu from the previous policy. When it comes to Parliament, how do you see that being discussed between both the sides?
No, I think there's a policy draft. Normally, it is not discussed in the parliament, but the policy is the first step to bringing in changes in rules,
Yeah.
the law. So when the law is drafted, the rules, there's a change in the Indian Forest Act, 1927, Wildlife Conservation Act, and 1972. And when these amendments are will be brought in the parliament, I'm hopeful that both the sides will discuss it. But as of now, there is some sort of a resistance from the opposition parties to the draft forest policy, because it tries to, for the first time, have some sort of a private player intervention in the forest management, which was not there earlier. So there is a lot of skepticism because the policy does not enumerate how and where the private participation will take place. It will be only in the plantations, or you will give it because there is the biodiversity law, or the International Biodiversity Convention speaks about a mechanism where the private participation can be allowed, where the money you are earning from the forest has to go to the local communities, some percentage of it. The mechanism is there under the Biodiversity Act. Many of the state governments have set up the committees where the native species have been put on a register, and there have been very pilot projects, successful pilot projects where the people have benefited. So the clarity is not there in the policy, but apart from this, the policy has many new things also.
Right.
One aspect I want to highlight is the urban forest processes.
Yeah.
As India is urbanizing, our spaces in urban areas which were once green have been taken over by the concrete structure. So an urban forest is important in many aspects. So one, it can control rising air pollution in the Indian cities. If you see the latest WHO data, even the CPCB data, the air pollution rising in Indian cities is abnormally high, highest in the world. If you compare with China, any other country in the world, any other city in the world, Indian cities is the highest. So the forest, urban forest, will help to fight air pollution, water conservation, because water is an issue in most of cities, and it also helps in management of flooding to a large extent. So this aspect of I think the policy of urban forest, if it's implemented by the municipal corporations in a proper way, it is an extremely positive step. But the debate and the discussion on the policy, I think, has happened, is going on, and the final draft with which the government will come up will incorporate all the safeguards.
Right. So debate and discussion on this issue will certainly go on in the time to come. We have this much discussion on this issue. Please join us after the break as we take up the changes in the labour reforms. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining us. We'll continue with Mr. Chauhan after the break as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome back to Policy Watch. We are discussing the policy initiatives of the central government. In a significant move this year, the Union Labour Ministry has issued a draft notification. The Industrial Employment Standing Order Central Amendment Rules 2018, which will enable the companies to hire workers for fixed-term and short-term assignments. Under fixed-term, employment workers are entitled to statutory benefits available to a permanent worker in the same factory, including work hours, wages and allowances. In addition, employers can directly hire workers for fixed-term contracts without mediation by a contractor. The policy, however, would also allow fixed-term employment across the sectors, amending the Industrial Dispute Act so that factories employing up to 300 workers can close or retrench labour without seeking government approval. The fixed-term employment is only allowed in the apparel manufacturing sector, but now it could be extended to footwear, leather and accessory sector. The Niti Aayog had recommended extending fixed-term employment to all sectors beyond apparel in its 3-year action plan unveiled last year. Among the rationale to bring in draft notification, the centre said it's encouraging states to undertake labour reforms so as to prevent workers who are often open to exploitation. The government hopes such measure will improve India's ease of doing business ranking and encourage hiring. Employment generation is high on the government's to-do list as more people enter job market every day. To discuss this policy in detail, I'm joined by Mr. Ajay, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and Mr. Chetan, Chauhan, Deputy National Affairs Editor, Hindustan Times, who continues with us in the discussion. First up to you, Mr. Dua. How far these changes will help both the stakeholders, the industry and the workers?
I think the change is good. It should help both the employers as well as the employees the workers, though I would still consider it as a half-baked solution to a festering problem which has been with which the policymakers in the country have been facing for almost 2 decades, but somehow or the other the labor laws could not be changed. I am really referring to amending the act which today says that if any factory hires any factory having more than 100 workers cannot retrench its people without the approval of the competent authority, and in the case of the private sector it is the relevant state government, and in the case of the central government undertakings, PSUs, it comes to the Chief Labour Commissioner. It has been realized for quite some time, felt that this amendment, that this provision of 100 workers may be seemingly in the interest of protecting workers. But if one looks at a larger picture, it was coming in the way of hiring more labor by employers who, instead of hiring more people and then coming into the purview of this act, had started resorting to contract labor as the way out to expand, or all so as to remain within below the 100 mark. The number of attempts have been made, at least I can recall for about last 20 years, that let's increase this limit from 100 to, first time it was said let's make it 500, then was, I think in Mr. Vajpayee's time when he was the Prime Minister, it was said let's make it 300. But it never really passed muster, either with the trade unions, and all political parties, as you know, have trade union affiliates, and certainly it didn't pass muster with the parliament, including in the Lok Sabha itself, when there was ample majority, because the interest, it seemed that as if this was being done basically to protect the employers, give them greater flexibility rather than the employees. So even this government, if you would recall, in 2014-15 had come out with the law, discussed it. It's a different matter that it wouldn't have passed probably the Rajya Sabha, but even in the Lok Sabha, the government faced obstacles. Then it was decided, let's leave it to the state governments rather than take on. So this particular notification, which was first issued in 2016, as you said in the introduction, for apparel industry, there was in the 2018 budget announcement, the finance minister said we are going to extend it to all sectors.
Right.
And a draft notification to that extent, I wouldn't call it a notification, it was announced by the Labour Ministry that it shall be extended to all the sectors, no longer confined to only apparels. But now it seems it's not going to be happening all across, but basically being confined to the other labor industries, labor-intensive industries like the
footwear,
the leather and all kinds of things. I think it's a good way forward, but not really an entire solution to the problem of the employers who say that why should we be engaging labor on a permanent basis than we can if we do not have demand for it, or the demand for a particular, or if the nature of the industry is seasonal in character.
Chetan, given the nature of labor reforms, it's always a topic that evokes discussion. You think this notification or change in rules could have been any better?
No, I think labor reforms in this country is not easy. As Mr. Dua has said, that last 20 years, it has been a difficult proposition. This government also tried codification of labor laws, bringing in changes, hire and fire policy. But I think this step is a good step, because if you see the IT industry abroad, they hire people on a fixed contract basis. And this is basically for labor intensive industry at the lower level, but even in the Western world for IT industry, some other industries, fixed contract basis people are hired. But in a country like India, because the social security is not there, I'm not saying this, I'm speaking about the bigger, larger labor reform, the protection of a laborer is not there. If you see a large number of industries, the regulations, the labor regulations are not fully enforced. And if a person or the union goes to a labor court, it takes years and decades to get sort of a justice. If the government wants to bring in labor reforms of any sort, the justice system should be quick and fast.
Right.
Then only the redressal mechanism will be good. Today, the company knows that if we fire somebody, if somebody is forced to leave, the guy will spend his entire life in savings in fighting the case. And in most of the cases, nothing happens. So, the balance between the protection of laborers and the interest of the employers has to be balanced. And I think the labor unions have been opposing it because the balance is not there. This step is good because it provides a flexibility to industry to employ people for a fixed contract, because a large number of companies in apparel, leather, they get contract for a short duration contract, maybe seasonal contracts from one company for 5 months or 6 months they have to deliver. After that, they don't have any sort of work. So bringing in them parity with the regular employees, I think will be beneficial for the people who are working there. Otherwise, it used to be ad hoc basis, and the money, such sort of fixed contract people used to get, used to be substantially less than the regular employees.
You see, that brings my second question to you, Chetan. Now, several states have already amended Industrial Dispute Act, and some are on the course to do so. You think the states, there be any changes, challenges before the government when it comes to this law?
I think because many of the states have brought in labor reforms. I recall Rajasthan has done huge labor reforms as soon as the Sundararaja government came in the first year. She brought in a lot of labor reforms, the codification of labor laws. Rajasthan was one of the first governments to do it, and there was not much of an opposition from the labor unions. There was some, but not much. Because if the speedy justice system is there, which was one of the steps Rajasthan government took in the codification, helps. But I think the bigger labor reforms some of the state governments have been proposing and the labor union have been opposing. Until you bring in some changes at the central level and then enforce through a mechanism of where all the stakeholders are brought on table and some sort of consensus is built, it's very difficult to bring in labor reforms.
Right. Mr. Dua, now India in last year has moved 30 places, entering top 100 countries in the World Bank Ease of Doing Business report. Now, as it aims to be in the top 50, would this labor reform significantly help in improving overall business environment in the country?
Introduction of fixed employment, fixed contract employment, which is actually contractual in nature, but for a fixed period, at the end of which you can let go of a person without having to give him notice. That's all. It is a contract labor, but it's with a fixed term, and the person gets the benefits which otherwise accrue to a permanent labor. That's the scheme of things. I would think that, as was initially mentioned, this is certainly a step forward. To that extent, yes, we would probably go up the rung, the ease of doing business, the criteria, but it's not sufficient. What the businessmen have been wanting is flexibility of the kind which was being sought to be given through the central amendment, which fell through for reasons which we all know, and was left to the state governments. The states which have brought it, Rajasthan is one state, but it's not particularly an industrialized state where the formal sector has a huge share of the labor force. It is the major industrial states which really need to go and take these measures if we have to go up the ease of doing business index. And there I have in mind Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, West Bengal, Karnataka, and Gujarat, where progress has been made in Gujarat. But it is those kind of states where the activity in the formal sector is considerable that action has to be taken. And in any case, as you know, whatever the constraints might be of this World Bank index, it's been only looking at two cities, Mumbai and Delhi, when it ranks the countries, and neither in Delhi nor in Mumbai, which is or those provincial governments, the NCT of Delhi or the state of Maharashtra, have made much progress in bringing their own law, amending the Industrial Disputes Act to allow for raising the limits to 300 persons or 200 persons. They haven't done it. So to that extent, I think the movement up in the index will be marginal.
Lastly, Chetan, to you, do you also think that this will help in ease of doing business, or there is something else to have a sufficient balance being struck?
No, ease of doing business, I think the labor reform is not the only hindrance. There are many. Even though the state governments have started some single window clearance proposals, systems, but on ground they haven't worked. Because even today, if you see the approval of the project, the brick project to take, from environmental approvals, the labor, the municipal approvals, the land use changes, land acquisition, it is a long drawn process. It is not easy thing to set up an industry in India. So if India really wants to improve its ranking on ease of doing business, then state governments have to bring in a lot of changes.
Okay.
And I'm afraid some of the state governments try, but there have been a lot of opposition. Opposition both from people and the political parties. The problem is when somebody is in power, the idea is different. When they get into an opposition, it dramatically changes.
Right.
So,
Right.
a similar thing, if you see say, in some of the Congress governments, the Congress is opposing this land acquisition reforms in Jharkhand, for example, where the present BJP government tried some sort of reforms to attract investors. So, they opposed it. The reforms which the Jharkhand government proposed was something similar to which the UP government was speaking about, but they opposed it. So it is a very difficult proposition to bring in changes at the state level also, because there's lots and lots of opposition. The people fear that they will lose their land,
Right.
and many of the provisions like getting employment in the factory or whatever it is are not fulfilled fully.
Right. So there we have a step forward, yet lot to be done to have things streamlined at the ground level. We thank both our guests, Mr. Dua and Mr. Chauhan. Thanks for joining us. Keep watching Rajya Sabha TV for more. Thank you.